3 disturbing Uber rides that took a dark turn. Story 1, The Silent Ride. It was a typical Saturday night when Sarah, feeling the weight of a long week of work, decided to call an Uber to head back home. The streets were buzzing, filled with the noise of the nightlife, laughter, and the distant hum of traffic. She'd had a few drinks, but nothing that would stop her from getting back safely. The Uber app pinged, and soon a black sedan pulled up the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and dark sunglasses, smiled at her through the rear-view mirror. "Where to?" he asked, his voice low, almost too calm. "Just take me to Fifth Avenue," Sarah replied, not thinking much of it. She slipped into the back seat and buckled up, her phone already pulled out to check her messages. The car started moving, and the sounds of the city faded as she settled in. At first, everything seemed normal. The car hummed along the road, and the man didn't say much. Sarah was tired, her eyelids heavy, so she let her mind wander as the faint scent of cologne mixed with the stale air of the car. But then, something odd happened. The car took a turn she didn't recognize. She glanced up at the driver, but he didn't seem to notice. He just kept driving, the city lights flickering past the window in a blur. "Hey, this isn't the way to Fifth Avenue," Sarah said, her voice unsure. The driver didn't answer. He just kept driving. Sarah felt a chill run through her, but she shook it off as nothing more than nerves. After all, she'd been drinking. "Excuse me," she said again, her voice sharper this time. "I think you're lost. You missed a turn." The car slowed for a moment, and she saw the driver's hand twitch, but he didn't speak. His eyes remained focused on the road, though they seemed far away, as if he wasn't seeing anything at all. Seconds stretched into minutes, and Sarah's unease grew. The streets were getting quieter, more desolate. The buildings were becoming dilapidated, the kind of place she wouldn't normally find herself in. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice now tinged with fear. Still no response. Her heart raced as she noticed the car's speed increasing, the engine growling in a low, unsettling hum. She glanced around and realized the lights outside were fading. There was nothing but dark streets and the occasional flicker of a broken street lamp. The Uber ride, which had started so casually, had now turned into a nightmare. "Stop the car," she demanded, panic creeping into her chest. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. Sarah flinched, her hand instinctively gripping the door handle. The driver's head turned slowly toward her, and for the first time he spoke. "Get out," he said softly. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. There was something about it that felt off, like he was not quite human. Sarah stared at him in confusion, her heart pounding in her chest. "I what?" "No, take me home. Now." But before she could react, the driver reached into the center console and pulled out a phone, holding up to her face. The screen was cracked, but there was something on it, an image of Sarah. "Why do you look so worried?" he asked, his voice still calm, like nothing was wrong. "It's just a ride." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. That image, it wasn't one she had ever seen before. It was from an old photo she didn't remember taking. A picture of her sitting on her couch, wearing the same clothes she had on now. Suddenly, the car doors locked with a loud click. The driver slowly turned back to face the road, his hands gripping the wheel tighter. "You should get out," he said again, his voice colder now, almost like a warning, before it's too late. The car lurched forward again, speeding up. The next few minutes felt like hours. Sarah's mind raced, trying to come up with a way out, but the car kept driving faster and faster, until everything outside turned into a blur. The driver's eyes remained fixed ahead, a deep, dark void behind his sunglasses. Sarah screamed, but the only sound she could hear was the engine roaring. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the car screeched to a halt. The lights flickered. Everything went silent. Sarah dared to glance out the window, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The street was completely empty, dark, and silent. There was no sign of life, no cars, no people. Just an endless stretch of black asphalt leading into the void. When she looked back at the driver, he was gone. The seat was empty. The car, still running, was now parked in the middle of nowhere. The Uber app was no longer on her phone. Story 2, The Vanishing Passenger. Ben had always been a late-night worker. His job as a graphic designer meant that he often worked well into the early hours of the morning. He had gotten used to the quiet, eerie streets during his commutes home. But one night, everything changed. It had been a long day, and Ben was more than ready to head home. He opened the Uber app, requesting a ride. The familiar ping soon notified him that his ride was on its way. When the car arrived, it was an older sedan. The driver looked about the same age as Ben's father, with salt and pepper hair and a gentle smile. He greeted Ben with a soft good evening and opened the door for him. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Just take me to Riverside," Ben replied, still half asleep, staring out the window. The drive started smoothly. Ben leaned back, staring at the streetlights as they passed by, the hum of the car's engine lulling him into a sense of comfort. But the peace didn't last long. Ben noticed something strange. There was a figure in the rear-view mirror, a shadow shifting slightly. At first, he thought it was just his tired eyes playing tricks on him. But then it happened again. He squinted, trying to get a better look. The figure appeared to be a woman, sitting in the back seat. But when Ben turned his head to see, no one was there. He sat up straighter, his unease growing. The air in the car felt heavier, the atmosphere thick with something he couldn't place. "Is everything okay?" Ben asked, his voice breaking the silence. The driver didn't respond. His eyes remained focused on the road, his expression unchanged. Ben tried to shake off the feeling, but it was like the air had thickened, becoming oppressive, almost suffocating. Minutes later, the figure appeared again. This time, Ben saw her clearly. A woman with dark hair, wearing an old-fashioned dress. She was sitting beside him, her face pale and motionless. He gasped, turned to look at the driver. But the driver was still staring straight ahead, unaffected by what was happening. Ben's heart began to race. The woman in the back seat slowly turned her head toward him, her eyes wide and empty. Ben's mouth went dry, and the car seemed to slow. His hands gripped the seat, but he couldn't look away. The woman opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then she disappeared. The car was empty. Ben was alone in the back seat. When he turned to the driver, the man glanced at him briefly and smiled. "Riverside," he said, his voice strangely distant. Ben couldn't speak. He just wanted to get out of the car. But when he checked his phone, the ride was still active. The map showed them driving. Nowhere. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as the car continued its unnerving journey, the lights outside becoming more distant and vague. He tried to shake off the feeling of dread crawling up his spine, but it was impossible. The sensation that something was terribly wrong gnawed at him. He fumbled with his phone, desperately trying to figure out what was going on with the ride. The map on his Uber app was no longer displaying any clear direction, just a white, blank screen. No roads, no streets, no destination. The app itself appeared to be malfunctioning, and it made Ben feel more isolated, trapped in the ever-thickening silence of the car. The woman had vanished, but the unease didn't fade. The weight of the air in the car was suffocating, and every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. Ben had tried speaking to the driver a few times, but each time he got no response, just that same blank stare straight ahead. Then, without warning, the car came to a stop. The street outside was pitch dark, void of life. It was as though the world had disappeared. Ben glanced at the rear-view mirror again. There was nothing there. No reflection of the woman, no movement, only the darkness that surrounded them. Ben's panic reached its peak. He couldn't stay here. He had to get out. He reached for the door handle but froze. The app had crashed, and his phone was now showing a strange message. Ride completed. He jerked his head back to the driver, whose eyes were now locked on him with an eerie calm. His lips barely parted, and his voice was almost a whisper. "It's over now. You're here." Ben didn't understand what the driver meant, but the fear inside him surged. He couldn't breathe, his throat tightening with a mix of confusion and terror. Before he could react, the driver simply turned off the engine, and the car went silent. Still, the app showed the ride was over, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was far from done. Ben exited the car, stepping onto the unfamiliar street. only to turn around and see nothing. The car was gone. In fact, there was no sign of any car ever being there. No tracks, no lights, just an empty stretch of pavement. That's when the whispers started. They were faint at first, almost imperceptible. But as Ben took a step toward the darkness, they grew louder. In the corners of his eyes, shadows moved, just out of sight. He didn't wait to hear more. Ben ran, and as he looked over his shoulder, he swore he saw the driver's face in the distance, standing motionless, watching him from the shadows. He never found his way home that night. Story 3, The Silent Driver. It was another late evening when David decided to call an Uber after a long day at work. His usual routine was to grab a ride home, but tonight was different. There was a feeling in the air, an unexplainable, oppressive weight. The app connected him to a driver almost instantly. The car was just a minute away. When the vehicle pulled up, it was an old white SUV, a little worn on the edges, but nothing that stood out. The driver was a tall man in his 40s with dark, nearly black hair, and a thick jacket that made it hard to judge his build. David climbed in without thinking much of it, tired and ready to get home. As he buckled his seatbelt, he turned to the driver. "Hey, how's it going?" David asked, trying to make small talk, but the driver didn't respond. Not a single word. David dismissed it as being a man's personality. Maybe he was shy or didn't like to talk to passengers. He settled into the back seat, trying to distract himself with his phone. But as the car started moving, a strange tension hung in the air, one that David couldn't shake. The car moved through the usual streets, but something felt off. The driver didn't make a single turn in the usual route home, taking unfamiliar streets and driving in the complete opposite direction. David's instincts told him to speak up, but something about the driver's unblinking silence kept him from asking where they were going. Minutes passed, and the night grew darker outside the windows, the only light coming from the headlights of the car. David tried to glance at the driver through the rearview mirror, but it was impossible to catch a glimpse of his face. The man's head was always slightly tilted forward, his eyes obscured by shadows. "Excuse me," David said, his voice shaking slightly. "Where are we going? This isn't the right way." The driver didn't respond. The car slowed to a stop, and David's stomach lurched. The headlights now illuminated an empty, desolate road, the type that didn't feel like it belonged in the city. The air outside was thick with fog, and for a moment, David couldn't see past the front of the car. I think I need to get out," David said, his voice barely a whisper. The driver remained still, his posture unnervingly rigid. Without warning, the driver reached down to the gear shift, and the car's engine cut off, plunging them both into complete silence. The oppressive stillness made David's heart race. He fumbled for the door handle, desperate to leave. His mind screamed, "Open it and run." He knew the driver wasn't a normal man. There was something wrong with him, something almost inhuman. But as his hand gripped the handle, it felt stuck. No matter how hard David pulled, the door wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the back window cracked slightly open. A cold gust of air rushed in, carrying with it the faintest scent of something metallic. David turned, expecting to see the driver, but instead, there was nothing. No one. He wasn't alone, though. The back seat, now bathed in the dim light of the dashboard, was filled with an overwhelming presence. David's breath hitched in his throat as a cold, clammy hand slowly pressed against his shoulder from behind. David snapped his head back, expecting to see someone or something, but saw nothing. Only the empty seat and the relentless fog pressing against the windows. The hand was gone. The app on David's phone was frozen. The map showing his ride didn't change. It was as though the app was locked in time, caught in some never-ending loop. David, terrified and trembling, knew that something beyond his understanding was happening. He looked out the window, desperate to escape. But when he turned back to look at the driver again, the man's face was now visible through the rearview mirror. The eyes were hollow, empty black voids, and as David gasped, the driver's lips moved in a silent whisper. "You're too late." The fog outside thickened, consuming the car entirely. David couldn't breathe. And then there was nothing. 5 minutes passed, or maybe it was 5 hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning. David never made it home that night. No one ever saw the driver again. his profile, his car, even his name, had disappeared from the app entirely. The authorities found no record of the ride, no trace of what had happened to David. Some say he was a victim of a glitch in the system. Others believe he's still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting rider. But one thing is for sure, sometimes your Uber ride can lead you somewhere far darker than you expect.